Behind the Veil, where empathy and reason meet.
Liberals and conservatives today have radically different ideas about how to alleviate poverty, and to what extent we are obligated to address poverty-related issues. But if you were to ask most people why we should do anything about poverty, you can't get a straight answer. We want to explore the most basic question. Why should we address poverty-related hardship? We can't speak for anyone else, but we feel that our empathy drives us to care about and seek to address poverty. Empathetic individuals should want to do something about poverty, and John Rawls provides a framework of how to create a just society free of poverty.
Empathy, regardless of political, religious, or cultural difference. Most of us would agree that at some basic level, humans care about other humans. In fact, most would argue there's a moral rightness in caring for others. For me personally, I went on a service trip to Grants Pass in Oregon. And it was a long day, it was hot, it was like 100 degrees outside. But I saw this one woman named Jenny, and it's an experience I'll never forget. As she went through the line, I caught her eye. And right about this moment was she had reached the end, and she broke down in tears. She had gone without food for about 3 days, and her face is one that I'll never forget. I could see every tendon in her arm. And I have to say, seeing something like that just doesn't allow you to stay the same. If people could truly see the suffering in this world, that empathy would drive change.
Imagine you were walking by a child drowning in a pool. Would you consider it acceptable to ignore that child and its plight? Probably not. Most would feel that, in this case, an action in the face of known suffering is itself a moral failure. So doesn't this mean that we also have a duty to address the poverty we know is going on when we can, even though we didn't cause that poverty? Though evaluating moral intuitions is always a tricky business, we believe that empathy forces us to feel, on some level, that human lives matter. If you are like the vast majority of humans and agree that, on some level, human lives matter, then stay tuned, as this is the only assumption we feel is necessary to construct our argument.
And it's not just individuals who suffer when poverty goes unaddressed. When people are impoverished, and as a result their basic liberties and capabilities are infringed, it's not just the person who's suffering, but society as a whole. Widespread poverty will only make society worse in the future. So wouldn't we want everyone to have the capability restored? Especially if it's to everyone's benefit. The next Einstein or Rembrandt very well may be in poverty. Would we really want them to be stuck in poverty? Positive moral action. For some reason, some of us have been blessed with ability or attributes despite having done nothing to deserve these abilities or attributes. As a result, these blessings obligate us to work for the betterment of all, as we will discuss with Rawls' theories later.
Justice means a lot of things to a lot of people, so we're just going to go with a fairly simple conception that says you should treat others the way you want to be treated. But how on earth can you apply the golden rule to policies? We aren't going to go so far as to outline any specific governmental policies to address poverty, but we think a useful tool is John Rawls' Veil of Ignorance thought experiment. This allows us to put all the motivators into one structure.
Imagine that every actor in society had the ability to recreate society in whatever way we wanted. And just for the sake of argument, let's be ungenerous and assume that everyone's going to act with solely their self-interest in mind. If everyone's given an equal position in the construction of society, they would still choose to adopt principles of justice, equality, liberty, and other principles that most people would agree are morally just, even if for no other reason than just to protect themselves.
The virtue, the beauty even, of the Veil thought experiment is that it allows one to think in ways that removes their subjectivity, yet still consider what any person wants in a society. As Rawls argued, the first principle that a group of self-interested and rational actors constructing a society behind a veil of ignorance would choose is the principle of liberty. In other words, the actors would agree to a scheme of basic liberties for all societal members.
So why should we care about the veil? Obviously, no one has ever actually constructed a society behind a veil of ignorance. But as a thought experiment, Rawls has provided us with a framework useful at determining what a society organized around the golden rule would look like. It gives us an ideal to actually strive for.
For example, a society organized by Rawlsian principles would not allow prejudice based on irrelevant characteristics like gender, race, or sexual orientation. Even if, behind the veil of ignorance, the actors would not know if they would be part of the majority or minority groups, they would choose to protect the rights of all out of self-interest.
Now, we're not saying that in order to help the impoverished that all inequalities must be eliminated. In fact, Rawls illustrates that a just society can be created with inequalities, if these inequalities promote incentives within an economy, as well as promote virtues of hard work and perseverance.
However, while a just society can still tolerate some inequalities, a truly just society will have to offer substantial equality of opportunity. If people matter, and if we are going to allow inequalities to maintain the economy and encourage certain virtues, then a just society must ensure that everyone has fair access to positions of importance, both public and private. Important positions must be open to anyone regardless of non-relevant factors like race, socioeconomic status, and gender. Adopting this principle will ensure that everyone is able to pursue their conception of the good while still allowing those who work harder to be rewarded for their work.
In fact, Rawls takes this a step farther to argue that these inequalities should only be tolerated if they contribute to the well-being of all for it to be just. Behind the veil, rational actors would want inequalities in society to be for the benefit of the least well-off for purely self-interested reasons. Even in the real world, wouldn't an empathetic individual want existing inequalities to help others and society? For example, inequalities may drive the scientists to develop a cure for terminal diseases, or even develop green energy. However, to what degree should these inequalities help the least well-off?
Even if one accepts Rawls' conception of justice, it is debatable whether rational actors behind a veil of ignorance would consent to policies that help the worst off to be as well off as possible, or merely help them reach sufficiency. This is a live question, but we don't feel that coming up with a definitive answer is necessary to establish the general theory of justice. Even if a Rawlsian paradise could be made, this thought experiment does not take into account what we have to overcome and what we as a society have done. Consider how richer Western countries, including but not limited to the United States of America, create and perpetuate poverty worldwide. Imagine a U.S. company exploiting the people of Cambodia in sweatshops to make cheap tennis shoes. Well, you don't really have to imagine so much as you just have to go and open any news source. In reality, the situation is not so much that we, as innocent bystanders, walk by to see a child drowning and have to act even though we did not create the situation. As thinkers like Thomas Pogge argue, it's more like we are driving down the road and hit a child running across the street. Not only do we have a duty to act in the face of known suffering, but we have a special obligation to help this child since we caused its suffering. Similarly, since rich Western countries cause real harm across the globe, we, as a society, have a special obligation to address the poverty we create and exacerbate.
An important point to note is that in a basically Rawlsian system, the liberty principle must be prior to the rest of the system. People's basic liberties must be protected first and foremost. In other words, people cannot have their basic liberties infringed upon in order to benefit someone else. If we are making a just society, we cannot do this through injustice. This creates a definite place for debate. For example, some would say that taxation is the seizure of property, therefore violating their right to property. However, a potential counter to this is that the method in which a person gains the property is often through social goods, shared by society, which necessitates compensation.
Again, we don't pretend to have the answers to which freedoms constitute the most inviolable basic liberties. Just as important to recognize and take steps to combat, however, is the pervasive oppression that permeates much of modern society. There are many forms of oppression: exploitation, marginalization, violence, and so on. But the important thing to be cognizant of is how existing cultural structures privilege and disadvantage different groups based off non-relevant factors, and how this obviously violates principles of justice.
So let's bring it back to the main question. Why should we address poverty-related hardship? Empathy, justice, concern for society, and positive moral duty are all motivate us and drive us to address poverty. Rawls provides a particularly useful framework for how these motivations work on a theoretical level and give us an ideal model to strive for. But fundamentally, if we believe in a just society and do care about our fellow human beings, if we believe that they have worth and that their capabilities matter, that they have contributions to society that we need, and we believe that we want to live in a society where we feel like everyone has an equal shot, that everyone's liberties are protected, then we cannot allow the world to just remain as it is. We have to strive for something better. We have to find where reason and empathy can meet together and provide the pathway for the new society.